The year is 553 AD. The air in Constantinople, the heart of the Byzantine Empire, is thick not just with the scent of incense and old parchment, but with imperial ambition and theological urgency. Within the hallowed halls of the Second Council of Constantinople, rows of bishops, their faces etched with a mixture of piety and political calculation, are gathered under the watchful eye of Emperor Justinian I. This is no mere academic debate. It is an act of spiritual surgery, a moment of profound consequence where the very architecture of the Western soul is being redrawn. The subject of their condemnation is a man long dead, a ghost whose towering intellect still haunts the corridors of Christian thought, Origen of Alexandria. On the table before them, a series of anathemas, formal curses, are being drafted. A decree is drafted, its ink poised to stain not just history, but eternity itself. And among the list of Origen's supposed heresies, one idea stands out for its breathtaking scope: the doctrine of the pre-existence of souls and their subsequent journey through multiple ages, a concept often simplified and conflated with reincarnation. To understand the magnitude of this moment, we must travel back 3 centuries to the bustling, cosmopolitan city of Alexandria. Here, in this crucible of Greek philosophy, Jewish mysticism, and nascent Christian theology, Origen Adamantius, the man of steel, forged a theological system of unparalleled brilliance and complexity. As head of the catechetical school of Alexandria, he was a titan, a scholar who reportedly dictated to 7 scribes at once, producing thousands of works, including the Septuagint, a monumental 6-version edition of the Old Testament. But it was his speculative work, Forum, that contained the seeds of his future condemnation. Origen, deeply influenced by the Platonic tradition, wrestled with a fundamental question of theodicy. How could a perfectly good and just God create a world filled with such profound inequality? Why is one soul born into poverty and sickness, another into wealth and health? His answer was radical. He proposed that in a timeless beginning, God created a vast number of rational spirits, angelos, all equal and all existing in a state of pure contemplation of the divine. But some of these spirits, through the misuse of their free will, grew weary of this divine love. They cooled in their devotion, their fall from grace creating the very fabric of the material universe. This fall was not a one-time event, but the beginning of a vast cosmic education. The material world, in Origen's view, was a divine classroom, and our lives within it were remedial lessons tailored to the state of our souls. A soul's station in life was not a random accident or a mark of divine favoritism, but a direct consequence of its choices in a pre-existent state. This led to his most controversial idea, Adalmuna, or the universal restoration of all things. Origen argued that God's love was ultimately irresistible and his pedagogical project was perfect. Therefore, over vast cosmic cycles and through successive embodiments, not necessarily as animals or other beings, but in different spiritual and material forms, every single soul, including the devil himself, would eventually be purified, educated, and restored to its original state of unity with God. This was not the simple karma of Eastern thought, but a deeply Christian vision of redemptive love operating on a cosmic scale. It was a universe where no soul was eternally lost, and every life was a step on a long journey home. His ideas were not a fringe belief. They were a powerful and intellectually satisfying framework that influenced countless theologians, including Gregory of Nyssa and Evagrius Ponticus. But what was intellectually satisfying to the philosophers of Alexandria was deeply problematic for the architects of an imperial church. By the 6th century, the Roman Empire was Christian, and the church was no longer a persecuted sect, but a powerful institution of statecraft. Emperor Justinian sought a unified, orthodox faith to bind his sprawling empire together. Origen's complex, cyclical, and ultimately optimistic cosmology was a threat to this new order. If salvation was an eventual certainty for all, what was the urgent, singular importance of the Church as the sole arc of salvation? If our earthly lives were just one chapter in a long book, did it diminish the finality of sin and the absolute necessity of repentance? The linear model, one life, one judgment, one final and eternal destination of heaven or hell, was simpler, more dramatic, and far more effective as a tool of social and moral control. It placed the ultimate stakes squarely within a single lifetime and positioned the institutional church as the indispensable mediator between humanity and its eternal fate. The condemnation of Origen in 553 AD was therefore not just a theological correction. It was a political consolidation of power. It was the moment the Church chose a straightforward, linear path over a complex, cyclical one. It was the closing of a door on a vision of the afterlife that was arguably more merciful, more philosophical, and perhaps more mysterious. What was the true nature of this banned afterlife, and what was truly lost when it was cast out? Building on the condemnation of Origen and the Council's firm stance, the intellectual currents of Western Christian thought began a decisive and irreversible pivot. The vast cyclical ocean of Origenist cosmology, with its waves of creation, fall, and restoration, receded, leaving behind the stark, unyielding line of a new eschatology. Imagine a scribe in a cold stone scriptorium in medieval Europe. With painstaking precision, he illuminates a manuscript, his brushstrokes depicting a straight, unwavering path: creation, a single life, judgment, and a final destination. This image, so familiar to the Western mind, represents a radical departure from much of the ancient world's perspective. The philosophical underpinnings of Greco-Roman thought, which had so deeply influenced Origen, Plato's discussions of the soul's transmigration, the Pythagorean belief in metempsychosis, the Stoic concept of the universe's periodic destruction and rebirth, were systematically sidelined within mainstream theology. They were replaced by a distinctly Judeo-Christian eschatology, a sacred history with a definitive beginning, a climactic middle, and a final, irreversible end. This was not a subtle shift. It was a foundational reconstruction of time, destiny, and the human condition. The figure who did more than any other to lay the cornerstone of this linear fortress was Augustine of Hippo. Writing in the chaotic aftermath of the sack of Rome, his monumental work presented history not as an endless cycle of rise and fall, but as a purposeful, divinely authored narrative moving toward a final judgment. For Augustine, the cyclical theories of the pagans were a revolving circle of godlessness, offering no true salvation or final rest. He argued fiercely that Christ's sacrifice was a singular, unique event in history. Christ died once for our sins, and its power would be diluted if it were merely one event in an endless series of cosmic repetitions. This theological argument had profound consequences. It locked the soul into a single, high-stakes performance on the stage of life. There were no second chances, no subsequent lifetimes to correct mistakes or deepen wisdom. Your 70 or 80 years on Earth were your one and only audition for eternity. This linear framework became the engine of Western civilization. It instilled a sense of urgency and historical importance. If this life is all you have, then your choices here and now carry an almost unbearable weight. The finality of sin became absolute, and the sacrament of confession, administered by the Church, became the crucial mechanism for managing one's eternal ledger. The concept of salvation was transformed from a gradual educational process of purification into a juridical verdict delivered at the end of a single trial. This worldview powerfully shaped Western culture's orientation toward the future. It fostered a teleological mindset, a belief in progress toward a final goal, that would later be secularized into the Enlightenment's faith in human reason, the Industrial Revolution's drive for relentless growth, and the modern obsession with deadlines, legacies, and making your mark. In contrast, the enduring traditions of the East, Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism, retained their cyclical understanding. For them, the soul is a traveler on the great wheel of life, its journey dictated by the law of karma, the intricate web of cause and effect that plays out over countless lifetimes. Life is not a test, but a long and winding school. The goal is not a heavenly reward after a single life well lived, but nirvana, liberation from the cycle itself.
This creates a fundamentally different psychological and ethical landscape. The pressure is less about a final judgment and more about gradual self-improvement and the slow untangling of karmic knots. As the religious historian Mircea Eliade noted, this cyclical view provided a defense against the terror of history, the anxiety produced by chaotic, irreversible events. For the West, history was a one-way street hurtling toward a final destination. For the East, it was a vast, repeating pattern from which one could eventually awaken. How did this definitive shift impact our understanding of justice, purpose, and the ultimate fate of the soul, contrasting sharply with the enduring cycles of karma and samsara in Eastern traditions?
From that definitive shift away from cyclical thought, we fast forward 1,500 years, through the ages of faith, reason, and industry to our own time. Here, in the quiet, secular spaces of the modern West, the idea that was so decisively banned and buried seems to be making a compelling and unexpected return. We find ourselves not in a cathedral, but in a softly lit therapist's office. A man in his 40s, an accountant with no particular spiritual beliefs, lies back in a reclining chair, his eyes closed. He speaks in a halting, emotional voice, not of his childhood, but of the biting cold, the smell of gunpowder, and the terror of a battlefield in a war that ended a century before he was born. He describes a name, a town, a family that are not his own, yet the memories feel more real than anything in his current life. These contemporary encounters with what many call past lives are happening with increasing frequency, far from the oversight of any church, challenging the very foundations of the linear eschatology that has dominated Western consciousness for centuries. This modern resurgence didn't appear from a vacuum. Its roots can be traced to the late 19th century, when figures like Madame Blavatsky and the Theosophical Society began to systematically introduce Eastern religious concepts, including karma and reincarnation, to a Western audience hungry for spiritual alternatives to what they saw as a rigid and demystified Christianity. The 20th century saw the rise of popular figures like Edgar Cayce, the sleeping prophet, who gave thousands of psychic readings detailing his clients' past incarnations. But for many, the idea remained on the fringes, a parlor game for the mystically inclined. That began to change with the work of Dr. Ian Stevenson, a psychiatrist at the University of Virginia School of Medicine. For over 40 years, Stevenson eschewed hypnosis and mysticism, instead applying a rigorous scientific methodology to investigate a specific phenomenon: young children, typically between the ages of 2 and 5, who spontaneously began to speak of a previous life. He and his team traveled the world, meticulously documenting over 2,500 cases. They recorded the children's statements, identified the deceased person the child claimed to be, and then painstakingly verified the details: names of relatives, descriptions of the house, the specific manner of death. In many instances, the children had birthmarks or birth defects that corresponded to the fatal wounds of the deceased individual, a detail Stevenson found particularly compelling. While his work remains controversial and is far from definitive proof, it forced the topic of reincarnation out of the occult bookstore and into the halls of academic debate. So why is this ancient, erased idea resonating so powerfully now? The answer may lie in the spiritual landscape of the contemporary West. For many, the traditional Christian model of a single life followed by an eternal heaven or hell no longer provides a satisfying answer to the problem of suffering and injustice, the very problem Origen tried to solve. The idea of reincarnation, by contrast, offers a compelling narrative of cosmic justice through karma. It suggests that our circumstances are not random, but are part of a meaningful, soul-shaping curriculum. It transforms the fear of death, recasting it not as a final end, but as a transition, a graduation to the next grade. In an individualistic culture that prizes personal growth and self-discovery, the concept of the soul's long educational journey is deeply appealing. It provides a grand, epic narrative for lives that can sometimes feel small and insignificant. This has fueled the growth of New Age movements, the popularity of past life regression therapy, and the widespread, if often vaguely defined, belief in reincarnation among those who identify as spiritual but not religious.
A door that was sealed by an imperial decree in 553 AD is being pried open again, not by theologians or bishops, but by ordinary people searching for meaning. The enduring human fascination with return, with second chances, and with a universe that is ultimately just and educational continues to surface. It compels us to ask, what does this resurgence mean for the future of faith and for our ever-evolving understanding of what lies beyond the final frontier of death?